Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. So, before we start the country statements, according to the list, Ms. Mia Mikic, Director of the Trade and Investment and Innovation Division, will make an announcement.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two very brief things. First, about interpretation. The channel for Chinese interpretation is now switched to channel 6. So if you are wanting to hear Chinese interpretation, please turn to channel 6. And secondly, can you please kindly refrain from bringing any food or drinks into the conference room? Thank you very much for your compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we will begin this afternoon session with the country statements. In the morning session, distinguished representatives of the Russian Federation and Kiribati have already made their statements. So now we have in the list distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates of ESCAP member countries and ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address the 6th session of the Committee on Trade and Investment on behalf of our government. As the world economy is expected to slow this year, the World Bank projected that this year's growth rate would fall to 2-point mark. Among other issues, worsening trade tension is severely dampening business actors' confidence. While actively engaging in the endeavor to tackle various trade issues, our government made clear that a safe and seamless trade environment is instrumental to contribute to the trade increase in global economy. In this regard, a lot of global efforts have been made, in particular in the area of trade facilitation. The WTO is working to solidify trade facilitation agreement. The WCO is handling fast changes under the slogan of smart borders for seamless trade, travel, and transport. Our government has done every effort to develop our trade facilitation level further. We have introduced the AI-based X-ray screening on international express shipment and blockchain-based customs clearance for goods directly purchased from overseas. Extensive border monitoring is also available with intelligent CCTVs and drones. Now, high-risk items are screened out at the border level, but safe items are cleared faster. With these technologies, we are going to set up a faster and more convenient trade system fit for the fourth industrial revolution. The Korean government is well aware that unsustainable growth can be enhanced by trade facilitation in the Asia-Pacific region. In order to support ESCAP's initiative on regional trade facilitation and capacity building for developing countries in the region, the Korean government provided a trust fund of 1.1 million for 6 years from 2013 to 2018. From this year, we intend to scale up the funding and provide 660,000 for the next 3 years. We do hope those capacity building will contribute to economic growth and job creation for each country. To conclude, I would like to reaffirm our government's commitment to tackle global economic difficulties, in particular by contributing to capacity building for trade facilitation and making best practices with full cooperation with countries in this region as well as ESCAP. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. Now I have on the list a distinguished representative of Mongolia. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank UN ESCAP for introducing Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report 2018, which has provided a comprehensive and forward-looking analysis of the potential impact of existing and potentially increasing trade tensions in Asia and the Pacific. I wish to take this opportunity to brief you on the progress achieved in Mongolia's economy over the recent years. Thanks to the national policies and programs to accelerate trade and investments, Mongolian economy has showed a strong growth with 6.9% in 2018. Mongolia's foreign trade turnover reached $13 billion, which was a record high performance, rising by 22.3% compared to the previous year. Total exports increased by 11% and import increased by 17%. As of 2018, foreign direct investment in Mongolia reached to $2 billion, rising by 25.6% compared to the 2017. With a view to reinvigorating inclusive growth and economic resilience, the government of Mongolia is taking the following measures. Firstly, at the forefront of the national development priority is economic diversification, since the increasing dependence on the mining commodities exposes our economy to risks caused by the drop of commodity prices. Majority of export commodities are the raw materials, which entail a little or no value addition. However, cashmere, yak and camel wool, meat products, dairy and leather products have a real export potentials given Mongolia's animal husbandry based on the nomadic pastoralism. There are also untapped potentials in Mongolia for developing innovation in technology-intensive sectors such as ICT, renewable energy, and tourism. Therefore, government of Mongolia has adopted a so-called Mongol Export program in September 2018 to promote manufacturing and exports of non-mining products. Secondly, as you are aware, that Mongolia is a landlocked country located between two giant markets, Russia and China. Thus, the issues of trade facilitation and transport connectivity in Mongolia are the crucial importance to resolve common challenges faced by the landlocked countries. In terms of trade facilitation measures, we are fully committed to implementing the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. In 2018, the National Trade Facilitation Committee, chaired by the Foreign Minister, has adopted the Mongolia's roadmap for the trade facilitation for 2018-2020. In particular, trade facilitation roadmap will help to ensure the implementation of the Category B in a systematic and planned manner. Furthermore, we, in collaboration with the World Bank Group, International Finance Corporation, are preparing to launch a trade information portal that provides comprehensive single-point access to market intelligence, current trade news, and information on trade law and regulations, duties, taxes, and other services to facilitate trade. Mongolia aims to develop a better transport network to reduce transport costs and time to the market. In line with this objective, Mongolian Parliament has approved a bill on the ratification of the Intergovernmental Agreement on International Road Transport along the Asian Highway network established between Mongolia, China, and Russia. It should be noted that this agreement contributes to the facilitating trade and transports of the neighboring and third countries, broadening cooperation in transport sectors and creating legal arrangements on transports to the seaport through the territories of our neighboring countries. As you might know, that Mongolia signed MOU on establishing a program on establishing economic corridor between Russia and China, which sets the basic principles and mechanism and priority projects to increase trade turnover, ensure competitiveness in the goods supply, facilitate cross-border transportation, and develop infrastructure. In order to coordinate the actual implementation of the economic corridor, a joint investment and planning center to coordinate the economic corridor was set up in Ulaanbaatar last year. Thirdly, in addition to the earlier mentioned measures, in recent years, Mongolia has been actively exploring possibilities of concluding FTAs with major trading partners. Since the first ever free trade agreement was concluded with Japan in 2015. A joint study on establishing possible FTA between Mongolia and the Republic of Korea was completed in 2018, which will be followed by the bilateral negotiation upon the completion of the domestic procedures. A similar joint study was also launched with the Republic of China. Furthermore, we are planning to start joint studies on the possibilities to conclude free trade agreement with the Euro-Asian Economic Union. Also, domestic procedures for acceding to the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement is at the final stage in submitting to the Parliament. Lastly, allow me to brief you Mongolia's national efforts aimed at improving investment environment. During the last 2 years, the government of Mongolia has taken several actions to restore investors' trust and confidence. Cooperating with investors and listening to their needs are the part of and parcel of our reform agenda to create a rule-based investment and trade environment. Therefore, regular consultation mechanisms with the private sector through the Public and Private Consultative Council was established under the Investment Protection Council in 2018. Council regularly receives suggestions from the entities whose legal rights are at risk of being violated. The platform will also prevent the adoption of policies and laws on the important matters related to business and investment environment without prior consultation with the private sector. In the investment environment policy and the planning framework, the National Development Agency and the World Bank Group are developing the investment reform mapping, which will conduct a comprehensive research to provide an analysis and assessment of the current foreign investment policies and legal environment of Mongolia, aiming to develop investment policy strategy and its action plan. In addition, the National Development Agency of Mongolia has recently established a one-stop service center for investors. This service will provide foreign investors with legal and market information, assist with legal entity registration and resident permits, and in the future will also provide information and assistance regarding the customs and taxes. The establishment of the service center will improve quality and coordination of the service for the foreign investors. In conclusion, let me express my sincere thanks and deep appreciation to the ESCAP, in particular to the Trade and Investment and Innovation Division for its valuable assistance in our capacity development and trade policy issues. I wish to reaffirm once again that Mongolia fully supports the ESCAP's work in promoting a more mutually beneficial trade and shared prosperity in this region. I wish every success to the conference meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akbolt. So the next speaker on my list is the distinguished representative of Bangladesh. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am representing on behalf of Bangladesh. Bangladesh offers an unparalleled investment climate compared to the other South Asian economies. To promote a more sustainable and inclusive investment environment, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority has undertaken steps for massive reforms to ensure creation of a true one-stop service for the investors, facilitate the development of entrepreneurs, aid the creation of necessary skills to match the needs of higher value production chains, efforts to improve the ratings of Bangladesh in various indicators such as Doing Business Report of the World Bank, Global Competitive Index of the World Economic Forum, and others. To improve Bangladesh's current ranking of 176 out of 190 economies mentioned in the Ease of Doing Business 2019 report to a double-digit ranking by 2021, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority has started to collaborate with different ministries and agencies to implement the necessary reform recommendations. These reforms, once implemented, will ensure a better business climate and smoother business operation in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished delegates. India commends the Secretariat for presenting an excellent and exhaustive Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report 2018. It provides an overview of the trade and investment trends in the Asia-Pacific region. It is indeed pertinent to note that the report underlines that last year, the ongoing trade tensions amounted to a loss of 200 billion of global GDP and a net loss of 2.7 million jobs. In addition, the rising fuel costs have put enormous burden on oil-dependent countries, which is causing uncertainties and volatility on trade and investment flows into the region. Despite the global uncertainties and rise in protectionism, India continues to be one of the fastest growing major economies. Although India has been growing at over 7% GDP for more than a decade, there are still significant challenges on the development front. In India, where 50% of the population is below 25 years, job creation becomes vital. We need to generate 1 million jobs a month for its youth. For us, the risk of a downturn in global trade is particularly detrimental. Keeping in view our development challenges and an aspirational youth that is seeking new avenues for jobs, India looks at trade as fundamentally a catalyst of development. Trade tensions have typically a cascading effect on the global trade. The projected opportunities for other countries in this trade tension phase are short-lived and obfuscate real issues of the dangers of protectionism and unilateral measures. It is important to recognize there can be no winners in this trade war. The climate of uncertainty affects developing countries the most as they suffer collateral damage as global supply chains get stifled. The report also underscores the importance of unleashing the potential of services trade, including tourism. At a time when merchandise trade is facing headwinds due to trade barriers, services trade can provide impetus to global trade. Services trade constitute more than 50% of GDPs of most countries in the region. Increasingly, servicification of manufacturing is taking place, and this trend will become more prominent in the Industrial Revolution 4 in the 21st century. Countries need to overcome unfounded fears of migration as a consequence of liberalization of services sector. The report's emphasis on use of digital technologies to make trade efficient is noteworthy. E-commerce platforms are enabling millions of MSMEs in developing countries to market themselves and plug into global value and supply chains. The report mentions about the importance of intensifying regional integration initiatives for liberalizing trade. Although this is a welcome suggestion, we should be mindful of the fact that not all countries in the region are part of FTAs. It is therefore all the more important that countries make conscious effort to restrain from pursuing protectionist policies, especially tariff hikes and non-tariff barriers that affect the trade of developing countries. Further, regional connectivity is an important aspect of international economic initiatives. However, it's our consistent stand that they must follow principles of financial responsibility in a manner that respects sovereignty and territorial integrity. In light of this position, India has articulated its principled position on BRI, which has been duly conveyed to ESCAP. Thus, if the reference to this initiative finds mention in the report of the committee, India's position must be fully recorded. India agrees with the assessment that WTO needs to be strengthened. A rules-based multilateral trading system is beneficial for all countries, especially the vulnerable developing and least developed countries. Reform of WTO without undermining the fundamental principles such as special and differential treatment is central to reviving WTO. India is of the firm view that as more than 2/3 of WTO members are developing and LDCs for whom development is crucial, S&D cut should be preserved. On the issue of role of ESCAP advocating how the member states can work together and the way forward, India notes that countries have different positions on reform of WTO, including those belonging to Asia and the Pacific, and the recommendation should keep that aspect in focus. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of India. Now I'd like to invite a distinguished representative of the United States of America. Since it seems that the representative of the US is not here, so let me invite the distinguished representative of the People's Republic of China. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Based on the analysis of data of 2017 and 18, the Asia-Pacific Trade and Investment Report 2018 provides an overview of the latest trade and achievement trends in Asia and the Pacific, which offers policymakers insights into issues of common concern. Take this opportunity, we would like to thank the Secretariat for this valuable report of huge significance. China shares the same concern as mentioned in the report about protectionism and unilateral action, and agrees to the necessity of speeding up negotiations on regional free trade agreements, including the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. China urges all parties concerned to take immediate action to push forward regional economic integration and make contributions to the steady growth of the region. China appreciates also the positive comments in the report on the Belt and Road Initiative. Data shows that since the initiative was proposed in 2013, the total volume of trade in goods between China and the countries along the Belt and Road has exceeded $5 trillion. The foreign direct investment has gone beyond $60 billion, and over 200,000 local jobs has been created. The principles of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is consultation, contribution, and shared benefits, comes in line with ESCAP's pursuit of boosting connectivity, both of which aim to improve regional economic growth and people's well-being. As China has launched a new round of reform and opening up, Beijing will soon host the second Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. China is willing to continue expanding common ground and cooperation with ESCAP to promote trade so that the Belt and the Road Initiative can better contribute to the economic and social development in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of China. Now, on my list, I would like to invite a distinguished representative of Sri Lanka who will make a comment to the panel held earlier today. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to all. In fact, I wanted to take the floor in the morning just to make a comment on the morning session. But I think the panel, the moderator at that time thought that I was going to make a country statement, so that section was kept for after lunch. Anyway, I just want to first thank the ESCAP for the excellent report that they have produced on trade and investment. It provides us a very useful and revealing statistics data. Very useful. I do not know even important finding out how they collected some data on trading services, which we find very difficult, generally speaking, to gather services trade figures. And then also I want to thank them for the selection of these topics, which are very relevant in today's context, not only for LDCs and developing countries, but generally for the entire world. These trade tensions and the possible, the issues and the benefits that may accrue to different countries at different level, and the NTMs, the difficulties posed by NTMs to particularly LDCs and developing countries, and e-commerce, etc., etc. So thank you very much. But however, we know very well these issues and problems the developing and LDC countries in particular have to face in the context of these areas. Trade tensions, NTMs, etc., are not very easy to resolve at individual level. So as a group, it's very important that we look at it as a group and then make some influence to the global decision making, because individual countries will not be in a position to get their voice heard that much. And then we know, for example, in the morning session, and later also we heard during the lunch that the launching of the FinTech fund, over 85 to 90% of businesses generally consist of all SMEs or MSMEs. So this shows the difficulty that we have to tackle. When it is an MSC, the SME from small countries, things become even more difficult. So let me share one of our experiences in Sri Lanka. We are at the very early stage of e-commerce. We have very small e-traders who are trying to do some business, but we find that big payment portals like PayPal not covering small markets like Sri Lanka. So there's an inherent problem for countries like us in exploiting the benefits from areas like e-commerce. So some of our people are trying, e-traders overcome this problem by having collection centers overseas. They have some arrangement overseas, they collect their payments there and then get them down to Sri Lanka. So this is just one example. And then the NTMs also, when we noticed the amount of NTMs introduced compared to facilitation measures, I think our own region itself has introduced quite a lot of NTMs. I don't want to mention the countries by name, but we note the countries who are on the top of the list. I think some of these, going through the report we see, are not directly relevant to address the goal 8, SDG goal 12, which deals with this responsible consumer and production pattern. So these are things that we should, I think, address effectively. And we also receive a lot of capacity building assistance in the NTM field, I mean, in terms of providing skill development, technical expertise, etc. But the problem still remains when small countries do not have the critical infrastructure like labs and then testing equipment, etc. Though they have to send sometimes their product samples to neighboring countries, get them tested, and then work on that. So these kind of things, I think it's high time that we consider, in addition to just expertise, whether there is a possibility to assist to build at least these fundamental, these facilities that they require in order to, support the export community to comply with these NTMs imposed in their key markets. And in the context of Sri Lanka, we are happy to inform that we are one of the countries who notified these category A commitments under the trade facilitation agreement before the closing date, I think, if I remember right, 31st July 2014. And then we have also set up this National Trade Facilitation Council. And then recently, with the help of World Bank, we launched the Trade Information Portal. And then World Bank and the EU, with the EU funding, and some Australian government also, we want to thank all of them, supporting us to do a blueprint for a single window. We know we have a long way to go, but we are in our own capacity. We are trying our best to comply, to ensure Sri Lanka's compliance with the trade facilitation and create it a sort of situation that would support us as our trading partners as well. So in the context, I think that's basically I have to share here. Then in the context of Brexit, we are talking about the Brexit. Brexit is also a matter of concern to most of the countries. In the case of Sri Lanka, EU is the largest trading bloc. As a bloc for Sri Lanka, I am sure most of the countries find EU in that way. And then within EU, UK is quite a substantial market for us actually. When the EU, the UK exits from the European membership, where that's a kind of question mark, what would happen to things like GSP, GSP plus schemes, or the benefits our products currently export. But we heard at the very early stage, the UK has announced that they will continue something like GSP or GSP plus for LDCs under EBA, everything but arms. in the case of developing countries, there have been some mixed sort of messages at times. We hear, yes, they are going to continue the same line of concession similar to EU GSP and GSP Plus, but we are yet to have a kind of clarity on that. So this is, if anybody following this Brexit, because I was closely following this Brexit process. I was based in London as a commercial representative there. So with that, I think I'll just conclude there, and thank you very much. We look forward to have a very productive engagement over the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Sri Lanka, for your comment and also statement. Now, as I can see that there are no more delegates wishing to take the floor, can I take that the committee generally endorses the findings and recommendations contained in the document for this agenda item? And does the committee wish to make a specific decision or recommendation on any topic under this agenda item? I see none, so we will now move to the next agenda. I recognize distinguished delegate of Japan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to take the floor after the you want to make progress in this today's proceedings. I just wonder. I mean, you just mentioned that the committee would like to endorse the report or recommendation. What is the recommendation we are supposed to take action? I mean, we are not clear about what element of the report needed action on the part of the ESCAP as an intergovernmental body. So there's no clarity on what sort of action, what is requested by the mentioned by the chair, or what it is mean to endorse. I mean, in the context of the report, I think this is the kind of unique proposal. I mean, I've been attending several committee meetings, but we never endorsed the report as such. So I just wonder whether what is meant by the committee endorses or take note of the recommendation contained therein. Lack of clarity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Japan. And I'd like to ask the Secretariat to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the delegate distinguished delegate of Japan. I don't think there is any mention of any actions. It is just to facilitate the preparation of the report and the general endorsement or taking note of the findings and recommendations contained in the document that we have listed under the specific number ESCAP/CTI/2019/1, and in particular on page 11, that committee has taken note of the issues for consideration by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments? If there are no comments or questions further, let us move to the next agenda item. Agenda item 3. Distinguished delegate of Japan wishes to take the floor again. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, again, we are not clear about the recommendation therein and what will be the implication of the endorsing recommendation. So my delegation is not comfortable with the proceedings, and only way we can deal with this issue is just simply take note. I mean, rather than endorse or giving any substantive blessing to the issue contained in the report. I think the report deals with the provide analysis mainly, and doesn't say what will be a concrete action anticipated out of the deliberation of this documentation. So in order to clarify the proceedings in a more neutral and manner, my delegation would like to suggest that we can take note of whatever contained in the report. Of course, I mean, each country has a view, and some of them are expressed during the today's deliberation, and that's fine. That can be reflected in the report of the committee. But I don't think we can take a collective action on certain specific action lines. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you. We will take your comment to the note, and now let's move to the agenda item 3. Navigating non-tariff measures towards sustainable development. For this item, you should have before you the document ESCAP/CTI/2019/2. Now I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Jan Duval, Chief of Trade Policy and Facilitation Section of the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division, to introduce this document. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So I will not, I try not to take too much of your time because all of you have the document in front of you, and there is a very interesting panel coming up under this agenda item. But the agenda is about, you know, how to navigate non-tariff measures towards sustainable development, right? And I think, as was already mentioned several times this morning, and also very recently by the delegate from Sri Lanka, I mean, big concern that is there is the increasing number of non-tariff measures, right? And then this slide shows you how the number of notified non-tariff measures, specifically sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as technical barriers to trade measures in Asia-Pacific, has been growing, right? Also, a lot of talk about trade tensions, tariff wars, and so on. I mean, the ordinary tariffs actually have been declining very much, right? And that trend hasn't reversed, right? So the rise of new non-tariff measures is actually very pressing and real problems in many countries at this point. Non-tariff measures cover more than 50% of the world's imports. I mean, non-tariff measures often are product-specific, sector-specific, and so on, but about 50% of the world imports are covered by non-tariff measures, and so each imported product on average face more than 2 non-tariff measures, right? And those non-tariff measures obviously are much more difficult to deal with and to administer, and often involve also infrastructural issues like laboratory availability of laboratories, testing, and so on, right? So at ESCAP, we've strengthened, based on the concern of the member state, we strengthen our work and our focus on non-tariff measures. And so we are currently doing analysis of the impact of non-tariff measures on trade and GDP, and looking at the effect on price of imports, right? And what we find so far, so this is all preliminary work, that NTMs add on average more than 10% to the price of imports, right? With imports from some countries and sectors obviously disproportionately affected because NTMs tend to be product and sector specific. And so if you look at this graph, again, 2 sectors that are of particular concern is the food sector, so related to agriculture, and also, and that's why I think we have a panelist from that sector in our panel later, motor vehicles and parts, which are very much affected by non-tariff measures. One thing that has to be kept in mind is although non-tariff measures are increasing, there is nothing really wrong with that intrinsically, because non-tariff measures often serve legitimate and necessary purposes. For example, sanitary and phytosanitary measures are actually to protect animal and human health, right? So it's obviously very important. And in fact, we see a very strong link between implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and non-tariff measures, right? So the idea is not to eliminate them, it's just to streamline them and make sure that they have a good reason to be there. And so again, at ESCAP now, we are doing some innovative work in collaboration with UNCTAD on trying to see how many of the non-tariff measures that are already there actually can be directly linked to Sustainable Development Goals targets, right? To try to see what is the link between NTM and the SDGs. And so the good news in a way, I mean, I don't know if it's a good news, but what we find so far, again, we are doing more work, this is ongoing work, we find that on average, 40% of non-tariff measures can be directly related to SDG targets. So again, that shows that it's not the idea is not to eliminate non-tariff measures, but actually to make it easier to comply and to implement them, right? In addition to that, we've been strengthening our collaboration with the International Trade Center, and we are releasing a joint report on private sector perspectives on non-tariff measures in Asia and the Pacific. ITC has been doing a lot of in-depth private sector surveys in a number of Asia-Pacific countries. So that report, joint reports, bring all this work together, all this survey data together. And what we find here is that 56% of the firms, right, that are included in the survey report that indeed non-tariff measures are burdensome, are problematic for them. And half of the non-tariff measures that they find to be problematic are actually from within the region. So we're not talking about NTMs, you know, imposed by necessarily EU or US or something, but really from within the region. So there is work to be done also within the region on this. 90% of all export partner problematic or burdensome NTMs are technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as rules of origin. So this is the type of NTM that are flagged by the private sector in most cases, right? In addition, if you look at non-tariff measures imposed domestically by domestic government to their traders, you find that 40% of those NTMs are relates to export certification, inspection, or licensing, right? I mean, one of the big findings, and there are several others, so you're very welcome to look at the report. I think we put a very small summary outside in the coffee break area. You will find that domestic procedural obstacles are actually the primary reason why non-tariff measures are found to be burdensome, right? So there are problems with actually the procedures that are in place, okay, in the countries in relation to non-tariff measures. So some of it relates to, indeed, infrastructure, as the delegate from Sri Lanka mentioned, lack of laboratories and so on. Some of it relates more to soft infrastructure issues. And here, that relates directly and very importantly, I think, non-tariff measures to the trade facilitation agenda. And so what we've done actually in the report is we've looked at, we've taken the ITC data on private sector perspective on NTM, and we merged it with the UN Global Trade Facilitation and Paperless Trade Implementation data that is actually an initiative led by ESCAP. And that what we find is we find that indeed the countries who facilitate trade more have less of the private sector complaining about the burdensomeness and the complexity of non-tariff measures, right? So there is a direct linkage here between NTMs and trade facilitation and trade digitalization, if I extend this. In the document you have in front of you, we also raise the issue of next generation non-tariff measures. And here we are referring to regulatory barriers to digital trade. And I could see from this morning statements and discussion that this is a very hot topic. And so that's one of the reasons we mention it here, right? Right now, there is a number of new regulations and regulatory barriers that are coming up in the area of digital trade that can affect e-commerce and so on, in particular related to taxation of digital trade transactions and regulations of cross-border data flows, data localization issues, right? So again, here, we're not saying non-tariff measures are good or bad, right? I mean, there is very good reason for them to be there, but obviously it's a very important thing to look into it and try to start analyzing what is happening in this area. In the document, we also try to look at a little bit of some of the solutions for streamlining non-tariff measures, right? And try to take stock of some of the regional or sub-regional initiatives related to non-tariff measures. And so we don't really have in the document a comprehensive list, and so we welcome more information from your countries and from everybody on this. But definitely, there are ongoing sub-regional initiatives. I know ASEAN as a group, has been taking non-tariff measures very seriously. They've issued a new or revised set of guidelines on how to address non-tariff measures. Several regions, not only ASEAN, have also developed mutual recognition arrangements of conformance procedures related to non-tariff measures. And then also, for example, the Eurasian Economic Union has harmonized, because it's a union, through the union, harmonized non-tariff regulations, right? So there is a lot of initiatives that are relevant on streamlining NTMs and trade facilitation, one of which that is mentioned as well is the framework agreement on facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia-Pacific, in the sense that a lot of exchanging, for example, sanitary and phytosanitary certificates across the borders would definitely contribute in lowering the cost of SPS measures and implementations. The document really calls on the committee to provide input for the Secretariat to develop the next flagship publication of the Trade and Investment and Innovation Division, called the Asia Pacific Trade Investment Report 2019, right? The theme of this report will be the theme of this session, right? Navigating non-tariff measures towards sustainable development. And for the very first time, actually, we plan to issue that flagship report in collaboration and jointly with UNCTAD, right? And so what we would like to, the committee to guide us on is guide us on the issues they may wish to see emphasized or additionally included in the forthcoming report. We would like the committee to help us gather, and then if you, during this meeting or later, to share country experiences, good practices and lessons learned in this area, because there is a lot of solutions yet to be developed, I think, to streamline NTMs. And also, obviously, to discuss the role of the ESCAP Secretariat in building capacity and promoting regional cooperation to ensure that non-tariff measures support sustainable development. I think, Mr. Chair, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duval, for your presentation. Now, as part of item 3, a panel discussion will be held on the topic navigating non-tariff measures toward sustainable development. I have the pleasure to invite the moderator of the panel discussion, Ms. Mia Mikic, to conduct the panel. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If I may invite the panelists of panel 2 to join me at the rostrum. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Just continuing on what my colleague Dr. Jan Duval was saying, this panel is here to dig deeper or dive deeper or brainstorm in some of the issues that he has mentioned in his brief report of the work done jointly so far with the colleagues from UNCTAD. And so I certainly appreciate in advance the comments from panelists as well as the delegates here towards that end of really providing the proper focus and also adding to content that you will see or you have seen through this document has been meant to be covered through the report. Before I go to the questions, let me just very briefly introduce the panelists. We should have actually dedicated the whole day with them because each one of them carries a huge huge concentration of knowledge and expertise in this area, but I will ask them to be brief when we start discussion so that we can also indulge in delegates' comments. On my right, Ms. Pamela Koch-Hamilton. She is the Director of the Division of International Trade and Commodities and UNCTAD. If I may say so, Pamela, welcome to UN community. Pamela has joined UNCTAD last year, but she comes with a huge experience of working on trade issues through the American Development Bank and also working for the, if I'm right, Organization of the American States as well. So on my left here, I'm joined by Mr. Vanavit Akuputra. He is the chair of Regional Comprehensive Economic Program at Working Group on Electronic Commerce. It's a mouthful, but I think what distinguishes Kun Vanavit is also that he has contributed to the UN Global Pulse flagship innovation of our Secretary General on the big data, and so he definitely comes in here with that hat of talking about things digital, and we look forward to the comments. Then the second to my right, we have Ms. Belinda Weiland. She is the head of research and innovation of the Central Secretariat at the International Organization for Standardization. And it's our understanding that this is a new unit of the ISO, whose mission is to collect, analyze, and provide empirical data on the concrete economic, social, and environmental impacts of international standards. And this definitely goes a long way in terms of helping other agencies to understand better about how standards can be used to towards the social sustainable development agenda. Then to my second to my left, we greet Mr. Anton Sautenet, sorry, my French is non-existent, who is diplomatic advisor, international trade in Asia to the Public Affairs Department of Michelin Group. So he does come currently from the private sector, but he also in the past carried the head of the government official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also he has been engaged in research in the past, and currently also as I think academic staff or contributor to the Hanoi School of Foreign Trade, where he teaches international commercial law. And then last but not the least, we have third on my right, Ms. Kristina Chernyskhavskaya. Apologies again, that's a little bit long to my ability to pronounce this afternoon. A leading specialist in the trade negotiation department of the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. Ms. Kristina carries a huge portfolio of responsibility for the Russian Federation related to the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures in trade. And she is also involved in negotiations on establishment of free trade areas between Eurasian Economic Union and the third countries. So it's a huge responsibility that she carries on her shoulders, but she would definitely be then a great spokesperson for the experiences from that region in the context of application of non-tariff measures that we are discussing in this panel. So like what we did in the first panel this morning, I think we will probably go around the table and ask each panelists to give their perspective on really this topic and its linkage to the country's capacity and to use trade and investment, which are key means of implementation for the Sustainable Development Agenda. Because, you know, one thing is to proclaim that we should use trade and investment to help deliver sustainable development, but then on the other hand, if we actually do not let countries trade and investment as much as possible to their potential, then we limit them in their in that capacity to meet the commitment, aspirations, and ambition of the sustainable development. So let me turn first to my colleague from UN, Pamela. And you are leading now the team which has been engaged in the research on non-tariff measures. Actually, it's a premier research team contributing lots of data and analysis in that area. So building on that analysis, what are the key ongoing and emerging issues that you can bring to the table here that countries face in this sphere of non-tariff regulations? So pick 2 or 3 the most.
Just 2 or 3.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mia. Let me thank you first of all for the invitation. I'm very honored and very happy to be here. This is my first time to Thailand. This is my first time to ESCAP. My work has tended to be on the other side of the world, but to be honest, our challenges are no different, just in different languages, but no different. So I wanted to just say, first of all, that, you know, we know the issues of non-tariff measures, and we know, for the most part, the impact on international trade and what it means. We know, first of all, that the requirements in non-tariff measures do raise trade costs significantly. And we saw that presentation by Jan just earlier, so I won't repeat what he has said. But to give a specific example to the region with respect to non-tariff measures and how they can become barriers to trade, Afghanistan honey producers have had to stop exporting their products to Europe because it was too costly for them to prove that they meet all the hygiene and food requirements, food safety requirements required by Europe, and they had no accredited laboratory in the country. This is not unique, of course, just to Afghanistan. There are many countries that have this particular problem, but it highlights in very specific ways the kinds of barriers that can occur when non-tariff measures such as SPS and TBT are implemented. So UNCTAD has done a lot of work on the issues with respect to NTMs and how we can better equip ourselves to deal with the linkages between NTMs and the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me just start, first of all, with 3 points. 3, can I get 3? Just to make sure that we can put in context what we think we've achieved. The first thing is we have a common language. And when I say common language about non-tariff measures, we have a common language. This is the International Classification System on NTMs. And this was developed by UNCTAD and partner organizations. It provides a detailed, systematic taxonomy for NTMs. And that is very important in enhancing transparency for non-tariff measures. The second issue is that we've collected over NTMs on more than 90% of world trade. And for example, in this region, we've collected in all the ASEAN countries, the Russian Federation, India, China, Japan, but also smaller countries such as Papua New Guinea and others. So we've covered a wide range of most of the NTMs across this region. Thirdly, we've analyzed the data, and we have a much better understanding of the impact. And I think it's important to just point out a few quick figures which will give you context. The trade costs related to NTMs on average are 4 times higher than tariffs. And this is on average. Often NTMs are prohibitively high. And I think it's important to highlight this because we get so caught up in the news cycle of tariffication, and we ignore the underlying and more insidious issues related to non-tariff measures and what their impact can be. They're 4 times higher in terms of impact. Second, small and medium-sized enterprises, of course, are disproportionately affected. And of course, this is not a surprise to us. We know exactly what the impact can be. Thirdly, SPS and TBT measures are the most important ones, often accounting for more than 80% of the trade costs from NTMs. But there are significant differences, of course, across regions. Only one SPS measure in a developed country can cost low-income countries 3% of their exports. One NTM measure can cost 3% of a country's exports. You multiply that by a factor of 20, 30, then we can see what the impact will be exponentially. Finally, certain NTMs can also enhance trade by raising our trust, of course, in foreign products. So we're not trying to say that NTMs are inherently bad. What it is how do we address the legitimate concerns of utilizing NTMs for valid reasons, but not allow them to become non-tariff barriers. And I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pamela. You have stopped at the crucial point of what to do about it. Thank you very much for providing some additional figures to what Jan provided, and it's really, I think, to everyone's concern to hear that a country can be stopped from exporting one of the rare products that they're actually competitive in, and such high impact as 3% of the country export is definitely something that people cannot take lightly ever, and obviously we need to put the concerted effort by different agencies and different stakeholders to find a solution to that. And so I think this is a good forum to start looking for that. And to do that, let me turn to the private sector, to Mr. Savane. You can probably give us more specific examples that you have faced in terms of non-tariff regulations in your everyday business. And so if you can enlighten us with respect to that and maybe go into your assessment about how significant they are across the sector and the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your invitation, the invitation of ESCAP. Maybe first to understand the current situation of a global company such as Michelin in terms of business impacts of trade policy, let us consider 2 points. First, consider that Michelin has a very stable industrial footprint with 68 production facilities in 17 countries in almost every continent, which is able today to meet the global demand of tires. Now consider that we, Michelin, are able to produce every kind of tires for every kind of vehicles, motorbikes, cars, trucks, even aircraft. Actually, it is a huge amount of products. And what we can say is very simple. We are not able to produce all dimensions, all types of tires in every factory. So it means that even if Michelin has a factory in one country, trade is critical. And obstacle to trade is among the most critical topic that our business is facing on a daily basis. Now, if we have a look to the situation globally when it comes to non-tariff measures, what we can say is that there are 2 regions where we have many challenges to face: Africa and East Asia. For many reasons, the impact for us is huge. In Africa, we decided to close some factories for the last 10 years, but in any case, African countries are implementing many non-tariff measures with multiple forms: custom formalities in Algeria, discrepancies between international regulation and local standards, specific requirements on tires, stickers on tires before sales, specific requirements on fresh tires. So many situations which are typical for every country. Just to give you one concrete example, Tunisia, the government of Tunisia continues to implement a very expensive and time-consuming test process only on imported tires. Of course, the impact is huge for us, but not only for us. The impact is also important for our importer, which is a local economic player. The impact is also huge for, at the end, on the consumer, which we may face shortages, we may face increase of prices. So the impact at the end of the value chain is important also for consumers. To come back to Asia, of course, ASEAN countries are also implementing their own local standards when it comes to tires. We see that in Thailand, in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam. I will come back on that point. But, and sometimes it's going beyond technical barriers to trade. Just to give you the example for Indonesia, where we have some quantitative restrictions, so import quota, that we have to renew every 6 months. So this is something which is a huge challenge for our daily business. But just to explain it, to come back to your question, Mia, how significant NTMs are compared to tariffs. If you take an example, for instance, India imposed a new custom duties on tires or natural rubber. The impact is huge, but it's clear, and the impact is on sales, on supply chain. When it comes to NTMs, the impact is very broad, actually. Very broad and transversal. It impacts all the functions in the company. Sometimes our first difficulty is to understand the regulation, just to understand the regulation, to be able to implement it correctly. Sometimes the regulation is not published, is not notified to WTO. So this is a big challenge for us. Sometimes there is a new regulation which is published with a new marking. The impact is absolutely fantastic. We have to change, in that case, the molds of our products in all factories concerned. Maybe we can take also a concrete example with Vietnam today. In Vietnam, for many years, Vietnam recognized the UN standard, the international regulations for importation of tires. So when you was producing tires in France or in Japan, you was able to export to Vietnam without additional requirements. Okay? Today, the Vietnamese authorities decided to change the regulation on the automotive industry, not only on tires, and to come back to the previous situation, to come back to technical national regulations. What it means concretely for a company such as Michelin? It means that we have to retest all dimensions of our tires in Vietnam with limited testing capacity in the country. And we have also to organize factory audits in Thailand, in China, in Europe, in the US. So you can see here that the impact is not regional, it's not per country. The impact of NTMs is clearly a global one. I will stop on it.
Okay, sorry, I was taking notes. All right, thank you very much, and thank you really to putting this point forward that the impact is not localized, and I think what is for me fascinating is that such a huge company like Michelin is not able to actually deal with the testing requirements and having to complain about the cost that it increases, and then as Pamela said, imagine then SMEs that has to go through that. So the question really is, what do we do about it? We all recognize the value of having standards, in particular for tires. It is the safety thing, right? We cannot forego that element. It is for the purpose that protect our people. But we want to do something that would actually reduce the cost of making that measure work the same for all. And so this is again the point that I'm trying to push everyone to think about for maybe the next intervention. Now, if I may go back to different stakeholder, which is government. So, Ms. Christina, if I may use your first name, I hope that will produce less embarrassment to me. So you come from the government, but since you're not working only with the national government, but you're working in the context of Euro-Asian Economic Union, right? Can you perhaps tell us what is being done? What are the actions there to help dealing with the impact of NTMs?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you, Mia, for such interesting questions and for the opportunity to speak here at the Non-Tariff Measures panel of the 6th session of the Committee on Trade and Investment. As a representative of the Russian Federation, I would like to answer in Russian, my mother tongue, one of the official languages of the United Nations. Начну с того, что согласно имеющейся статистике, представленной на портале внешнеэкономической информации, в настоящий момент, если быть точнее, то на дату 1 февраля 2019 года 32 страны применяют в отношении российских товаров 165 ограничительных мер. И в связи с тем, что именно бизнес является для государства ключевым источником информации о фактических условиях торговли на зарубежных рынках, в сложившихся условиях взаимодействия государства и бизнеса приобретает особую значимость. Ведь чем раньше был выявлен необоснованный нетарифный барьер, тем раньше будут приняты действия по его устранению. Говоря о механизме взаимодействия государства и бизнеса, стоит отметить, что любой российский экспортер, столкнувшийся с нетарифным ограничением, может обратиться напрямую в Министерство экономического развития Российской Федерации. На специальном портале внешнеэкономической деятельности выложена информация о том, какие данные необходимо предоставить экспортеру для оценки соответствия выявленной ограничительной меры правилам Всемирной торговой организации. Прежде всего, это нормативные документы, регулирующие применение нетарифной меры в третьей стране, статистическая информация о нетарифной мере, а также предварительная оценка требований для поставки продукции. Кроме того, по направлению содействия бизнесу в преодолении нетарифных мер работает Российский экспортный центр. Сайт Российского экспортного центра представляет собой информационно-аналитический интерактивный портал, своеобразный навигатор по барьерам и требованиям рынков третьих стран. Данный ресурс предназначен для использования бизнесом с целью оперативного анализа потенциальных издержек и рисков, связанных с особенностями доступа товаров на зарубежные рынки. Система навигации на сайте РЭЦ позволяет бизнесу осуществлять поиск и получать детальную информацию о выявленных нетарифных барьерах по нескольким критериям. По критерию страны, по виду меры, по наименованию продукции, по коду товарной номенклатуры внешнеэкономической деятельности. Экспортер также может сообщить о новом барьере Российскому экспортному центру, заполнив соответствующую заявку. Тем самым будет дополнена информационная база ресурса, а РЭЦ, в свою очередь, оперативно передаст полученную информацию о выявленном барьере Минэкономразвития России. После получения подобной информации Минэкономразвития исследует новые данные. Подготавливается фактологический анализ нетарифной меры третьей страны, имплементирующей ограничения. Осуществляется оценка соответствия нетарифной меры нормам ВТО. Изучаются неблагоприятные последствия для российского рынка, а также делается заключение. В случае признания нетарифной меры в качестве ограничения, которое нарушает нормы ВТО, подготавливается план действий для ее отмены. Здесь можно подчеркнуть, что в действиях, направленных на устранение неоправданной нетарифной меры, Российская Федерация руководствуется целью досрочной отмены барьера, не требующей обращения к механизму органа по разрешению споров Всемирной торговой организации. И преодоление неоправданных нетарифных мер в основном осуществляется посредством двусторонних консультаций, заключения соглашения о свободной торговле, признания документов в области подтверждения соответствия, а также гармонизации технических и иных требований продукции. Что касается мер Евразийского экономического союза, здесь стоит отметить, что государства-члены Евразийского экономического союза участвуют в разработке будущих мер наднационального объединения и придерживаются той точки зрения, согласно которой право Евразийского экономического союза соответствует нормам ВТО. В декабре 2018 года, после проведения презентации договора о Евразийском экономическом союзе, на заседании комитета Всемирной торговой организации по региональным торговым соглашениям в этом смогли убедиться и остальные члены организации. В том числе страны Евразийского экономического союза подтвердили соответствие права Евразийского экономического союза нормам Всемирной торговой организации по пункту 5а статьи 24 ГАТТ, согласно которому пошлины в отношении третьих стран не должны быть более ограничительными, чем общее значение пошлин, применявшихся в составляющих его территориях до образования такого союза. Тем не менее, в случае, если третья сторона считает, что одна из мер Евразийского экономического союза не соответствует правилам ВТО, то согласно решению о процедуре разработки, принятия, изменения или отмены соответствующей меры Евразийского экономического союза, то третьей стране необходимо обратиться в Евразийскую экономическую комиссию либо в соответствующий компетентный орган государств-членов с просьбой о пересмотре меры. На этом у меня все. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christina, for clarifying the processes that exist in the Russian Federation and indeed in the Eurasian Economic Union. And I think it's worthwhile noting that the efforts are made to make it transparent and through the searchable tools and platforms that exporters can use. And this, I think it's worthwhile to also note your concern with the minimizing the burden on a dispute settlement body in the WTO by trying to actually remove the measures that you yourself did, not yourself as individual, but as a country or a member of WTO deem to be not compliant with the WTO rules. Now, from this national or regional regulator sort of tone, if I may move to Ms. Belinda Weiland, who comes from the global standard setting organization, international standard organization. Could you describe how your work in the organization actually helps to rein the use of these NTMs to their goal that are assigned in terms of public policy, rather than go rogue and do all sorts of damage that have been pointed to by our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in this committee meeting today. This is obviously a subject that is extremely relevant for ISO. So firstly, let me just explain what makes international standards attractive tools for policymakers who want to help implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. ISO's international standards are great tools for policymakers because they represent globally recognized guidelines and frameworks, and they cover a wide range of SDG-relevant policy areas, such as food and agriculture, water, energy efficiency, sanitation, healthcare, education, climate change mitigation, and I could go on. We have over 22,000 international standards, and ISO has recently done a mapping exercise to map the most relevant 600 to 700 ISO standards against the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We have a website where policymakers can go to find the most relevant standards for the goal they are trying to implement. And we also have publications such as this one here that can help policymakers identify the correct standards for them. What's more, ISO's international standards are developed with sustainability in mind. We even have a guide which provides guidance to the writers of international standards on how to take sustainability into account when they're drafting and revising standards. When policymakers use international standards in their technical regulations as part of non-tariff measures, they can also be assured that they are complying with their obligations under the WTO's Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, which obliges the members to use international standards as a basis for technical regulations when these standards exist. And the WTO has incorporated this in the agreement because it recognises the use of international standards as a powerful tool to address non-tariff regulatory barriers. But how do international standards reduce the regulatory burden on businesses and provide them with other benefits? So there are a great number of benefits to businesses and regulators for using international standards. They can decrease transaction costs among cross-border producers and between producers and consumers. They convey information about products and services and thus reduce information asymmetries between market actors. They can also improve transparency and reduce the cost of doing business, facilitating foreign direct investment, for example. And they enhance the competitive advantage of national companies by encouraging innovation and increasing productivity and quality. International standards can also build confidence in the quality and safety of traded products, and thus of the reputation of the company that's producing them. Of course, we do recognise that the flip side of these benefits is there are some costs for producers to implement the international standards and to comply with them. For example, the testing and the certification that Antoine was referring to before. A World Bank survey recently showed that in developing countries, 44% of firms had to conduct significant duplication of testing procedures to meet foreign requirements after domestic requirements had been met, and 30% of firms had to conduct complete duplication of testing procedures. And close to 70% of firms cited testing and certification costs as an important reason for not exporting to foreign markets. However, if governments base their NTMs on international standards, these costs can be minimised for businesses. Obviously, governments must retain the right to regulate, and some regulations are necessary for protecting health, safety, the environment. And if they use international standards, they can minimise the costs to businesses. And this is because international standards in non-tariff measures can act as a driver for regulatory harmonisation. And I think that's really key, regulatory harmonisation. They can lower costs for producers by removing the need to duplicate testing and certification procedures. And this trend has been confirmed by recent work done by the OECD, which showed that regulatory differences between countries is amongst the key factors that can explain increased trade costs related to regulations. Indeed, many studies have shown that using international standards is generally positive for export performance. One 2011 study looking at the export performance of firms in Europe and Central Asia found that certification to international standards increased the export share in firms' sales by around 44% on average, which is really huge. To give you a couple of examples of some international standards that can facilitate trade and export, ISO has a series of standards on the safety of toys, ISO 8124 series. And this is an international standard that is referenced in regulations by a number of countries in the region, including Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and at least a dozen more countries. And because this creates a barrier for producers of toys, because they must comply with this regulation. However, once you've complied with this one standard, it means you can export to so many different markets, and you only have to do the certification once. And another example is ISO 13485, which is a medical device testing. And the US FDA has recently decided that they're going to reference ISO 13485 in their regulation, which is going to mean that companies who are certified to this standard will receive significant benefits from easier US market access, because they will no longer have to comply in addition with FDA-specific processes. It also means reduced compliance and record-keeping burdens for manufacturers and exporters. And what's more, referencing international standards can be a good way to modernise regulations because the standards keep up to date with advances in the industry as they are regularly reviewed and revised. I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Belinda. I think you have thrown on us a truckload of positivities from having international standards, and I don't think that anyone would deny the benefits of having those 22,000 different standards. I think, but still leaves me with at least two questions. One really is the level of trust of everyone at the appropriateness of these standards, and how do we make sure that we all accept that they really need to exist for this purpose that we are talking about, and so at which forum and how we can engage on that. And then secondly, and perhaps equally important, is still the question, what do we do to then help people if the problem is then testing and firms can be certified, and then that certification takes them to multiple markets. Obviously there are benefits, but what do we do to really enable that firm to do the testing that is cost efficient and not erode the complete benefits of firm in terms of economic benefits. So there are still questions to be asked there, and thank you very much for giving us the list of all these benefits, because it's useful to keep them in mind from the aggregate level going down to the firm. So we have heard lots of examples here, and as if you have noticed, they have been dealing with honey, toys, tires, etc. But we have here expert Vanovit in terms of the world, digital world, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about what sort of barriers in this because the digital things don't cross the border, you can't slap anything on them, you can't test them, at least not that we understand how, right? And so what are the barriers that we currently have or we can expect to have in terms of digital trade? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I have the luxury of speaking something that very difficult to understand. It's very abstract. Let me start with, when we talk about digital, first thing that we forget is what impact that coming to us is the internet. And we have to remember that the internet is not under the treaties. It's not regulated by any treaties. The government have the roles in the government advisory committees. I used to be the vice chair there. The community of 4,000 people is managing the internet. That reflects also the effects on internet jurisdictions, how we manage, how we control it. The country in Asia Pacific have a different way of internet diplomacy or jurisdictions. For example, Thailand, the whole internet is managed by foundations, not a single seat of government that could be able to control. Some countries, some jurisdictions have a full control starting from the IP, the names, and even the protocol that we use in that territory. That are the first thing I like to set the floor to understand that what we're dealing with is something that each individual country have the difference. perspective and views on how we manage the internet. Secondly, when we talk about the digitals, there are a few things that I like to mention about. The digital products, digital services, or even the digital goods that we're talking, the definitions of the actor that relate into the whole supply chain is very diverse from one country to another. Who is in the trade communities in goods or in the services? You always have the definitions, even though we go to the annex of the financial services. There are big challenges how we call the non-financial institutes that become important roles like startup communities that offer the payment to consumers. And these are the facts of the definition is not clear. Internet and e-commerce is very young compared to the trade communities that have been around for many, many years. Secondly, the issues of internet have very much relate to the context of the consumers. We can go back and see that in the trade community, you might have technical barrier to trades or NTM, the phytosanitary from time to table, the certificate that require, but it's more narrow to the services or goods. With the context of digital, you tend to go beyond the object that we're looking at, and you go to the context of the impacts. Some might concern on national security, go to the context of the information, privacy, child protections. Every aspect is bring into the digital products. So what we do see is the NTM that built around the digital. People will start confusing and try to use a measure that might be designed for protecting national security. For example, the location of computing facility where the host should be located. Some concern on the privacy aspect, coming up with adequacy level of protections like GDPR with the Article 44 that prohibit all cross-border nature of the transaction unless it complies with a certain measure that's specified in Article 45 until 49. These are the facts that is happened in the as the measure that some of the countries do see that it's important to protect the consumer, protect the national security. Some might say that it's related to legitimate public policy. Mm-hmm. But then the most important thing is we have to understand the fact that the digital is based on the internet as it is today. To regulate something that is unregulated, it challenges. The community need to work together with us, and I think I do believe that the challenge of every government to coming up with the policy space that satisfies what the community wants. You can see the problem with the new services that introduces, and the government is very reluctant on how to react it. Even though there are no barrier on certain services, but that are the facts in the digital futures of the tariff barrier that more contexts. And it's become a national preference in that sense that it will be different from one country to another. Okay.
if I may follow up on that, because we have we do understand that even for the, let me call them traditional NTMs as opposed to these that now we are discussing, the cooperation between different countries in terms of imposing one regulation and solution is very difficult. Is it in the context of ASEAN? Is there any progress with respect to in the area of regulating these things as ASEAN?
I think ASEAN is also coming up with the e-commerce agreement already in place, even though it's not that much obligations. Certain thing in the text that everybody know is still based on something that for the technical people that look into the technical aspect, they think that it's rather very old. For example, we also follow the ancestral model law on electronics signatures. And ancestral tries to catch up with the yesterday technologies, but the legal frameworks is also very difficult in that sense. So whatever we discussed and coming up with the frameworks is mainly on the technical aspect that already exists. Secondly, is based on the consumer, like how we protect online consumer informations, the privacy aspects of it. I think that is quite clear that how ASEAN try to work together and also include all these is very known that is also included in the discussion in the RCEP agreement as well, and in the other like UNSWATAs and CPTPP, everybody talk about this basic measure that country could coming up.
Thank you very much. I think we are yet to catch up with that game. ASEAN being actually most integrated of all the sub-regions in terms of efforts to have harmonized or at least converging sort of regulation in not only this area but in some others. And then when we go to the other sub-regions, we can see even more disparate approaches and understanding of where we are with respect to what we need to protect, how, and what are the most important efforts. I know that we face, and I'm looking at my chair, we are time constrained. So let me very quickly test the temperature in the room and see whether there are any burning questions by the delegates for the panelists, and kindly be restricted to really ask a question rather than a statement. And I'm not asking for the country statements, I'm really asking for the questions to the panelists, right? Because the country statements will be following later. So sorry, my eyesight is not that good. Is that a question?
It's more a comment, maybe, if I may. It's very quick.
If it is very quick, yes,
yeah.
please.
So I was.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Julia Spies. I'm from the International Trade Center in Geneva, and I was very fascinated by all speakers, but in particular by the representative from Michelin, who gave us the private sector perspective on NTMs. And in that context, I just wanted to announce that at the ITC we are also running, besides our official program on NTMs, we are also running business surveys on non-tariff measures. We have done that in almost 70 countries, where we ask firms about their experience with non-tariff measures, and what we find is very similar to what you said. We find that very often in the overwhelming part of the cases, it's not the regulation itself that is burdensome, but it's the procedures related to it. Lack of testing facilities that you mentioned, lack of transparency, time delays, high costs, and these sort of things. So 2 announcements, and then done. We have a little booth downstairs. If you go down the escalators, it's next to conference room 4. I've brought some materials with me on the country reports that cover the Asia-Pacific region, and also a summary of the joint work with ESCAP. And this joint work is going to present it in more detail tomorrow in the afternoon session on this NTM side event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comment to the panelists? Any questions to the panelists? Okay. I will be then going, yes, sorry, Sri Lanka. A quick comment, please.
Thank you. Actually, not a comment. Actually, the question I note in the note prepared by the Secretariat for this session, there's some ongoing work. It says, let me quickly read it so it's easier. In the, because we know the UNCTAD has been compiling this NTM, but it's not regularly updated. So that is where you are just coming in. They say, in the absence of direct data on the benefits of producers and other constituents, UNCTAD and ESCAP are pursuing an indirect approach using complementary non-tariff measure data of international standard setting bodies such as Codex Alimentarius. So we see that, we know that Codex is the benchmark for international standards. And then based on that, countries are, introducing various sort of, NTMs. Some things, some certain measures may not be relevant, necessary even, but some trade restrictive measures. So this work, it says down, the process is expected to result in a fine-tuned understanding of regulatory distance and stringency of a product in a given economy relative to international standards. So this work, I understand it's ongoing, so any idea when this will be sort of available to the members like? Thank you.
Thank you very much for noticing that work. We have been engaged for several months on that particular aspect where we mapped the available standards based on Codex and then look at the distance of some other measures in the connection of also mapping it back to some of the SDGs and targets. We are hoping that the work will be done by October 2019 when we plan to publish the report, but we might have some preliminary findings before that, and we can, and then we can definitely share around for informal discussion. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please. I'm sorry. WTO. Sorry. Yes.
So thank you very much. Devin McDaniels from the World Trade Organization. I think one thing that struck me is I think almost all of the panelists talked about the challenge of duplication in testing and certification procedures. And I guess my question to the panelists on this is, what can we do to get regulators, because ultimately it's regulators who are designing and implementing conformity assessment programs, what can we do to get them to consider more the international environment, the international context, when they are imposing conformity assessment, that they aren't solely looking at their own domestic market? And how do we encourage more cooperation between regulators to avoid this type of duplication from coming around? Thank you.
I'm offering this to any of the panelists who is brave enough. Pamela?
I don't know if I'm brave enough. I probably just don't know better. I would think that one of the thoughts I had when I was listening to the presentations and after I made mine, and particularly listening to Michelin, it reminded me of going through airports. And if you've ever had to travel through 3 or 4 airports to get somewhere, as you must have, you'll realize that at one airport you don't have to take off your shoes. And then the next airport, you have to take out the scissors that they let you through at the other airport. And then the other one, they force you to put all your makeup in a plastic bag, and if it can't fit, then you have to throw away half of it. And so by the time you get to where you're going, you don't have your shoes, you don't have your makeup, and you lost your scissors. So the point I'm trying to make is this, that the issue probably needs to be raised at a multilateral level. where there is a multilateral agreement on certain of these entities, and I know Codex is the base, but is there a possibility, and this is something I'm just throwing out to the room, is there a possibility for looking at you know, a regulatory cooperation in a more systemic sense, so that we have at least something above Codex that will agree on, you know, certain key and fixed measures. We probably will never agree on everything because, of course, NTMs have other reasons why they're utilized. But at least on certain, you know, prescriptive and clear issues, is there a way that we could possibly begin to look at that? And I know people are very gun-shy of more negotiations. But the point is, I think that it's becoming worse and worse. I think that the first graph that was shown by Jan showed, you know, the fall in tariffs and the exponential rise in NTMs, and I don't see it getting any lower. So it's possibly something that we may want to begin to look at. Thanks.
Anyone else wanted to?
Just yeah. Maybe a quick, okay. Sorry. No, but I just wanted to tell that I think Belinda gave already some answers on this question, because actually I think it's the main point. We need to go to push regulatory cooperation and to push international standards. At the same time, there is no single answer to that. We need to adapt ourselves to the specificities of each country. Just to give you an example, Thailand is a good example. On the tire sector, on the automotive industry sector, Thailand understood that there is a need to go through international standards today. Why? Because there is a need to be an exporting country. It's clearly flexible and adaptable to the specificities of the economy of Thailand to today implement international regulations in the automotive industry, which is true for the automotive industry. It's maybe not true for other sectors. So it depends on the national interest after that. But we need to be flexible and to understand what are the needs of each country, especially linked to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. I do want to add to that while this is very important, then if you just leave it up to the national maturity of the country, it may go very wrong, because some countries would then just totally abuse it. Belinda, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just to the WTO's question about conformity assessment practices. There are, of course, international standards for conformity assessment. ISO has a committee on conformity assessment that prepares international guides and standards related to testing, inspection, certification, etc. So that's a start. They could use the international standards for these conformity assessment practices. But, of course, it's also really important that countries work on building up their national quality infrastructure, their standardization, testing, measurement, certification bodies, etc. And I think good regulatory practice is also really, really key. And the national standards bodies, the ISO members, some of which are here today, by the way, really need to work together with the governments. It's all about having a good level of cooperation and communication between the standards bodies and the regulators, so that the regulators can stay informed about the standards that are out there that can help them, and the standards bodies can help the regulators to put in place standards that will not impose significant difficulties on their businesses in terms of complying with standards, conformity assessment, etc.
Thank you very much, Belinda. I think let me try to close it now, because we have, I think, opened quite a few of the issues. I don't think that furthering the discussion will produce the result, but I would like to invite everyone to actually stay tuned and follow our work of all of institutions actually that are working together in this room. They are all present there on this topic, because I think what really boils down to is understanding better what a particular triggers of these costs are there, and how we can then really deal with through the regulation, and whether there are at the sub-regional or multilateral level, how do we actually eliminate those if they are really just the cost enhancing rather than helping to deal with the measure in terms of its public policy spectrum implementation. So we have heard here quite good ideas and the progresses that are made in different contexts, and we'll continue working together on that and bring some clarity to the particular approaches that international organizations working together with the regulatory authorities at different levels can maybe produce in this context, in the interest really for the not only consumers in the context of or people in a context of digital world and safety or national security, but also in the interest of producers that are on the receiving end of these barriers. In some cases, they are protected by those, and Pamela has indicated to the enormous increase of these NTMs that has really only indicates that our success in reducing tariffs in the past few decades has actually should be looked through the prism of how tariffs were substituted by the increase in non-tariff measures, right? And so what you win in one case by reducing a transparent and rather cheap barrier, right, through the increase of non-transparent, opaque, and the measures that are very different from one country to the next, and not as uniform as tariffs are. It's really a good question to keep asking, and I know that some of academics are actually saying, well, why don't we just forbid all non-tariffs measures and go back to tariffs, and then we know what the enemy is, right? So this is another extreme, which of course we can't entertain as simply as that. So for me, it really remains to ask all of you in the room to applaud our panel here that gave us such good insights from different levels, and then after that we'll give the floor to the chair to continue the session. So big applause to the panel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Pamela.
Thank you so much.
Very good.
When can we meet tomorrow?
Whenever.
Tomorrow or this afternoon? Tomorrow?
Oh, if you want afternoon, or depends on how you how tired you are.
Exhausted.
Sorry.
Thanks, Mia. Thank you. I can be here tomorrow at 10. Does that work for you? Or you're in the session tomorrow morning?
Do you want to come out later?
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Okay. What about
yes, I can be on tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'll come early, but I'll be here at 1 o'clock. So I'll meet you.
Thank you. So I have to move myself again.
Now we will do
so the country statements.
Country states are other list. I thank Ms. Mia Mikic and the panelists for the very informative session. Now I'd like to open the floor for comments. I'd like to invite the speakers on the list. And the first speaker on the list is the distinguished representative of Kiribati, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Our government, through trade policy objective, is keen on facilitating trade for sustainable development, ensuring that non-tariff measures do not restrict trade but meets the necessary public policy objective remains one of our top priority for our government to ensure trade and private sector competitiveness. Chair, in terms of best practices, Kiribati initiated a holistic approach towards strengthening national quality infrastructure through the formulation of the National Quality Policy. The policy has been instrumental in providing guidance in addressing policy issues related to accreditation, standardization, metrology, assessment. The implementation of the policy is coordinated through the Quality Coordination Committee, which is a multi-stakeholder platform where non-tariff related measures are discussed. In order to improve quality infrastructure, Kiribati has established a Fisheries Competent Authority to facilitate conformity assessment and procedures for fisheries exports. However, lack of in-country testing and lab facilities to facilitate conformity assessment procedures remains to be a key challenge to the operation of the Fisheries Competent Authority and other agencies in charge of the implementation of food safety measures and regulations. All testing facilities are outsourced from neighboring countries such as Fiji and New Zealand. Kiribati, as part of the implementation of the National Quality Policy, has undertaken a feasibility study to inform the establishment of a centralized laboratory to improve the testing capacity. Strategic partnership is required in the area of strengthening laboratory testing and SBS capacity in the context of the National Quality Policy. Chair, noting that there is no specific study undertaken on the impact of non-tariff measures on private sector in Kiribati, it would be good to undertake a diagnostic study to gather the private sector perspective on tariff measures in our context. Such study will inform awareness activities in the area of the NTM. Kiribati also seeks partnership with ESCAP in enhancing transparency of NTM, including capacity building in gathering and notification of such measures to facilitate trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Kiribati. And now I would like to invite the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me express my sincere gratitude to ESCAP for inviting to this meeting. My name is Erwin Turgunov. I am representative of the Ministry for Investments and Foreign Trade of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Let me present you investment potential of the Republic of Uzbekistan and meet you with the global new changes in our country. Uzbekistan is the largest market in Central Asia, stable and fast growing. Our population is 33 million people. Half of Central Asia population is living in Uzbekistan. In terms of gold reserves, the Republic is ranked 10th in the world. And in terms of its production, it's in 9th place. In copper reserves, it's in 10th, and in terms of its production, it's in 20th place. The number of residents with higher education is equal more than 18 million. Uzbekistan is one of the most populated countries in the region with free trade access to vast neighboring potential. Between Uzbekistan and the CIS countries there is free trade agreement, and in general it is access to a market with a population of almost 300 million people. In order to attract investment, we created 21 free economic zones on the territory of our republic, the residents of which are exempt from the following taxes and custom duties: land tax, income tax, tax on property of legal entities, tax on improvement and development of social infrastructure, single tax payment for microfirms and small enterprises, customs payments for equipment, raw materials and components imported for their own production needs, customs payments for construction materials not produced in the Republic and imported within the framework of projects according to list approved by the Cabinet of Ministers of the Republic of Uzbekistan. The basis of the ongoing reforms in Uzbekistan is the development strategy for 2017 to 2021, approved by the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. 5 directions of the development strategy is development of state governance, rule of law and legal reforms, development and liberalization of economy, development of social sphere, security, religious tolerance, and interethnic harmony, foreign policy. As part of this strategy, deep systemic reforms are taking place in the country which are already yielding results. We are constantly working on the development of a healthy competition, minimization of the government interference in the flow of economy, formation of the most favorable business climate in the country, protection of private property and implementation of serious measures against corruption. The number of newly created foreign enterprises in Uzbekistan increased threefold during 2018 as compared to the previous year. We granted the foreign citizens with the right to obtain a residence permit in Uzbekistan after the purchase of a real estate, annulled all restrictions on the repatriation of profits and the conversion of the national currency. We also introduced the practice of a transfer to private ownership of land for the construction for hotels. According to the indicators of business register, which takes only 30 minutes in our country, Uzbekistan stands in 20th place in the global ranking. In turn, the steps taken are already yielding the targeted results. In recent years, Uzbekistan has 3 times found its position among the top 10 reformers in the creating the most favorable conditions as per doing business rankings. This year has been declared as the year of active investments and social development in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is moving ahead with the reforms focusing on the first priority issues identified by the business community. First is currency regulation. Second is legal environment. Third is customs regulation. Fourth is tax system. And finally, reform of state governance. Efficiency improvement for state bodies to eliminate inconsistencies, bureaucracy. Implementation of e-gov system. For the first time in history, Uzbekistan has been assigned a sovereign rating with a stable outlook by international rating agencies such as S&P, Fitch, Moody's. Recognizing the results of the reforms, the credit rating of our country has also increased the OECD. Quite recently, we managed to quite successfully place the first euro bonds worth $1 billion, which reflects a high level of investor confidence in the solid economic foundations of Uzbekistan and the reforms being carried out in the country. Since February 1st, 2019, we have brought the number of countries whose citizens can visit Uzbekistan without a visa to 64 states. I want to emphasize that the adopted reforms have become irreversible, and one can be convinced that the business environment in our country will only improve and the guarantees for investors will increase. Ministry for Investments and Foreign Trade ensures front-to-end support for current and potential investors. So, it's time to invest in Uzbekistan. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you, distinguished representative of the Republic of Uzbekistan. And the next speaker on the list is distinguished representative of India. You have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank UN ESCAP for the insightful discussion on NTM. Global trade trends clearly indicate that tariffs have gone down significantly in the last decade. Commensurate to this change, there have been significant rise in non-tariff barriers. These are unseen walls being raised against free trade more often. These non-tariff barriers most often are used by developed countries than developing countries. Ironically, countries that advocate free trade are the ones that use them often as a measure of protection. UNTAD report indicated that about 60,000 NTMs are currently in place around the world, and a third of them are widely used in the Asia-Pacific region. India's average tariffs in 1991 at the time of our economic liberalization was about average MFN 125%, and these have been slashed over a period of 2 decades and now currently stand at 10.5% for industrial products and 16% for agricultural products. Further, through free trade agreements, our applied tariffs are still coming down. We stand at an average 7%. But we are much behind in setting standards for SPS and TBT measures. Our industry is ill-prepared to adhere to standards because of lack of awareness and also capacity building. Compliance to NTMs adds costs to developing countries and makes products expensive in the global markets. This is one of the reasons for products of developing countries not getting adequate market access. Having said that, there is a gray area between non-tariff measures and protectionism. There is a general tendency to see all forms of NTMs as protectionist measures, which is not true. Those which are fully consistent with WTO cannot be termed as protectionist measures as they are legitimately allowed under the rules, and the entire WTO membership has a consensus on that. It is for these reasons that we should support only non-discriminatory and evidence-based NTMs. This is imperative if we are serious in achieving SDGs, especially those targets such as poverty alleviation, fighting hunger, access to health, and job creation. Regarding the impact of non-tariff measures on foreign direct investment, India believes that conducive investment policy and market size are key factors for attracting investment in any country. I wish to comment on para 39 of the report, which brings out a significant positive correlation between increased protection of intellectual property rights and inward FDI. While this may be true to a certain extent, from a developing country's point of view, there is a need to balance its developmental aspirations, especially public good, access to affordable medicine, and regulatory framework. In the context of the observation in the report on the regional initiatives and good practices to streamline non-tariff measures, India would like to share with the forum that India and Singapore have recently signed a mutual recognition agreement on nursing to facilitate each other's understanding of standards in regulating the training and practice of nursing. Trade as a catalyst of development has a direct impact on the realization of SDGs. It is the collective responsibility of the global community to tackle NTMs that are trade restrictive and obstacles on the path to achieving SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation to deliver his statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak in Russian. Перед панельной дискуссией уважаемый глава делегации Шри-Ланка поднял такой важный вопрос, как проблема доступа экспортеров из развивающихся стран на электронные торговые площадки. Действительно, такая проблема существует. И зачастую операторы торговых площадок успешно продвигают экспортную продукцию из определенных стран, но при попытке регистрации на этих площадках экспортеров из ряда других стран возникают ограничения, например, связанные с самим процессом регистрации. Так, по непонятным причинам иногда бывают требования по созданию юридического лица экспортера по месту регистрации самой электронной площадки. По нашему мнению, это лишние бюрократические процедуры, которые являются излишними в условиях цифровизации, построения цифровой экономики странами. Здесь же существует проблема размытия налоговой базы при организации электронной торговли. Являются ли эти проблемы нетарифными ограничениями? Это дискуссионный вопрос, ответ на который может дать в том числе ЮНКТАД. Также обращаем внимание на необходимость борьбы с искажающими торговлю мерами. Проблема перепроизводства в некоторых секторах экономики, связанная с массированной господдержкой и чрезмерным субсидированием, излишним влиянием на рынках отдельных частных и транснациональных компаний, также должна получить должное внимание. Как пример можно привести недавние события в области торговли такими товарами, как сталь и алюминий. Выражаем обеспокоенность злоупотреблением такой интерпретации положения ВТО по нацбезопасности, которые способствуют введению мер торговой защиты. И сегодня мы уже видим негативные последствия от дискриминационных действий некоторых стран по закрытию своих рынков. Важно не допустить эскалацию этой ситуации, введение ответных мер, иначе это приведет к перераспределению товарных потоков и ограничению конкуренции. Также хотелось бы отметить позицию относительно отдельных пунктов доклада по сессии 3. Во-первых, это пункт 49, в котором такое понятие, как данные, трактуется в качестве новой валюты торговли. Полагаем, что данные скорее являются элементом электронной торговли, а не валютой. Также, во-вторых, относительно пункта номер 50, где требования стран по локализации данных, по организации их передачи отмечаются в качестве нетарифных ограничений. Полагаем, что такая трактовка является узкой, поскольку страны в основном используют такие ограничения не в целях ограничения торгово-экономического сотрудничества, а руководствуясь интересами безопасности. И то, как нам трактовать эти понятия, нам еще предстоит выработать подходы к трактовке этих понятий, потому что однозначного ответа на эти вопросы нет, и нам следует выработать единый понятийный аппарат по данной проблематике. В этой связи нам необходима выработка сбалансированного подхода к регулированию данного аспекта цифровой экономики, который тоже может быть выработан с использованием потенциала рабочей группы ЮНКТАД по цифровой экономике и безбумажной торговле. Спасибо.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation, for your comments and statement. And as I see, now there are no more delegates wishing to take the floor. Can I take that the committee takes note of the findings and recommendations contained in the document for this agenda item? Does the committee wish to make a specific decision or recommendation on any topic under this agenda item? Distinguished delegate of Sri Lanka, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sorry to take the floor again. This actually relates to the response given by the former panelist, I think Ms. Pamela, to the question raised by the WTO representative, that once this document that I referred to earlier is out in October, which will have a very clear identification of the NTMs that are far ahead above this codex, and whether there's any possibility to have some discussion to look at these excessive, we know that there's legitimate right for countries to have NTMs, but excessive ones. If this document helps us identify such excessive NTMs, which are actually acting as barriers, whether there's any way to sort of initiate negotiations I think at the WTO level or some suitable forum to look at this and then ask the respective countries so whether these are really necessary to have some kind of, I don't know, it can't be a binding agreement, but some mechanism to address these excessive ones. Because the objective of this document, I think, is a very valuable exercise. We are thankful to that. Once this document is out, I think we have to make some good use out of it. So what are we trying to do at the end of this document? Thank you.
Thank you. Are you proposing to create a working group? Not.
Yeah, it could be, because after all, there should be, some work on the way forward once we know this information. Whether there's any possibility to look at this, because we know that NTM is constantly growing while tariff is, getting reduced. So how do we tackle this NTM, growing NTM? So some mechanism, it could be a working committee, if the members think so. At least then we can create awareness, these countries have this, they are necessary, but these things could probably not be necessary. To some relaxation of this NTM story. Thank you.
Thank you. I was told by the Secretary that the expert group meeting can be organized on this issue, and your suggestion was taken into consideration. Thank you. Now, distinguished delegate of Japan, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I take note of the comment made by the distinguished delegate Sri Lanka, which leads to the possible discussion on the establishment of the expert group. I think that issue will be discussed under the different agenda item. I mean, there was a suggestion in a different item to talk about the possible working group or expert working group. So I just want to, at this point, I mean, my delegation would like to reserve on that element and on that issue and discuss further as appropriate in the context of the relevant agenda item. I think that is the agenda item that comes later or in the session. Thank you.
Thank you for your constructive suggestion. And are there any other delegates wishing to take the floor? I see no delegates who are willing to take the floor. So now with this we can conclude this agenda item. Now we will proceed to agenda item 6, promoting sustainable investment and business. I kindly request Mr. Mark Proksch, Chief of the Investment and Enterprise Development Section of the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division of ESCAP, to introduce the agenda item. Before Mr. Proksch makes his presentation, give a floor to Ms. Mikic. Yeah.
Apologies, Mark. Just a quick announcement for the participants that are engaged in other meeting, if they can take the leave from here and go to the meeting in meeting room A. Thank you. I saw UNCTAD ESCAP meeting. Meeting room A.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Proksch, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce this agenda item. We have discussed so many times about investment for sustainable development and always really wondered what it means, what is required for investment to actually make a positive impact on sustainable development. And one of the responses that we can give here is, well, it would go a long way if investment itself was sustainable. Right? So linking business and investment to sustainable development means really that we need to promote sustainable business and investment itself. The link between business and investment to sustainable development is basically that we know that the contribution of FDI to economic development is understood. But that's the economic aspect of it. And even there, the positive contribution of FDI to economic development really depends on the policy environment. It's not always positive. It is even less clear how FDI in business can contribute to the social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. So, I come back to my starting position. To enhance the contribution of business to sustainable development, there's a need for business itself to be sustainable. There are two ways how we can define sustainable investment. A sustainable investment is, of course, ideally an investment that is made by a sustainable enterprise. It can be interpreted as investment that contributes positively to all three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. It can also be interpreted as investment that directly contributes to achieving all 17 SDGs. For a business to be sustainable, it means that that business needs to adopt principles and standards of responsible business conduct. I don't want to equate that with corporate social responsibility. Originally, CSR, corporate social responsibility, was exactly meant to be that, responsible business conduct. But we have seen that it has evolved as a practice where businesses spend part of their profit on some social goal, but it does not refer to the way the business makes its own money. So while CSR has evolved as a way for business to spend its money to some social good, responsible business conduct really refers to the way a business makes its money, i.e. responsibly. Now, there are a lot of international principles and standards out there that guide a business to be sustainable. We have, of course, within the United Nations, the Global Compact principles and the principles of responsible investment. We have within the UN also the guiding principles on business and human rights. We have the Global Reporting Initiative, which helps businesses report on their sustainability practices, because otherwise, how do we know when a business is sustainable? For multinational enterprises, there are the OECD guidelines. There are the ISO 26000 standard series on social responsibility. And there are also sector-based standards for RBC, like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the Equator Principles for project finance, principles for responsible agricultural investment, and other industry standards and sustainable stock indices. So there are quite a few sets that are out there. And this also leads to a challenge to promote the uptake of responsible business conduct, because we can say that there are so many sets. There are some gaps, overlaps, and inconsistencies among these different sets. There's also limited involvement of outside stakeholders in formulating those standards, like the business sector itself. We can also say that some of these standards may undermine national legislative efforts and cannot be a substitute for legal provisions, because most of these standards are voluntary. They're not a legal obligation. Reporting on sustainability continues to lack uniformity, standardization, and comparability, and the lack of transparency in some standards makes it difficult for stakeholders to evaluate and compare the performance of different initiatives. There's very weak compliance by many companies, as compliance is perceived as a high burden. It's perceived as a high cost, in particular by small and medium enterprises. They are already, as we have heard several times, struggling to survive. And for them to start taking sustainability issues into account, for them, they see this as an additional cost item. And of course, we discussed NTMs. Some may say, well, if you start imposing this responsible business conduct standards on companies that operate in your country, that may be seen as a non-tariff measure. All right? So there is an element of truth in all of these issues, which we need to address. And governments, in particular, can play a very important role to promote the uptake of responsible business conduct. First of all, of course, moving beyond voluntary standards to actual regulation, to legislation, leveling the playing field and setting minimum standards, mandating reporting. Yesterday we had a meeting on investment facilitation for sustainable development, and I raised that question there too. It's very good to talk about investment facilitation, which basically means reducing regulation, reducing excessive red tape. Of course, if we here call for regulation, are we not contradicting ourselves? So this is a debate that we need to have. We often see that in international investment agreements, performance requirements are discouraged or prohibited. right? Because this is an obstacle to investment. But can we have at least a performance requirement that mandates that the company should conform to international established and well-accepted principles of responsible business conduct? If we all want to achieve sustainable development, maybe that is not too much to ask, right? Beyond regulation, governments can facilitate by simply providing information. There's a lack of awareness in many businesses about these sets of standards that are out there. And also, they don't really know what is involved. Often there is this prejudice, oh, it is just a big cost. We have no time for that. But they should realize that when a business is sustainable, they guarantee their own survival in the long run, because we really talk about corporate sustainability itself. Governments can promote cooperation and partnering with multi-stakeholders. I mean, first of all, it's the business sector itself. Can governments have a meaningful dialogue with business on this so that there is a common understanding of it? It can endorse and warrant. It can provide political support and public endorsement of certain sets of international standards. And of course, finally, you can negotiate more sustainable international investment agreements, IIAs, which is really a trend that we see now all over the world, where countries walk away from the very strict investor protection focused international investment agreements and are refocused to more sustainable development provisions and investment facilitation. Now, when we can talk about responsible business conduct, is all very well, and a business can say, you know, that they're sustainable. We in ESCAP, we struggle with the same thing. We have the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, which we will discuss in more detail tomorrow. And we have members there that, of course, pass a certain due diligence test. But how can we really be certain that these businesses are totally sustainable? By what yardstick do we measure that they're sustainable? So there is a need for sustainability reporting and a way of monitoring and evaluating the extent of sustainability of a business. Another issue relates to the impact of foreign direct investment. Wouldn't it be good if a country would really know what the impact of a certain foreign direct investment is on all three dimensions of sustainable development? For this purpose, we are working with international partners under a development account project to develop indicators for individual countries to help countries assess what the impact of foreign direct investment is. That helps them in approving certain foreign direct investment. It also helps them in guiding and implementing policies to guide foreign direct investment to maximize their impact for sustainable development. So in conclusion, the awareness and uptake of responsible business by businesses and also in government policy is growing, but it remains a work in progress. There are probably too many sets of standards and reporting tools, so we need some level of harmonization. International regional cooperation is important, given the cross-border operations of many businesses, and to arrive at some common understanding of these standards. And finally, monitoring and evaluation of business sustainability and sustainable investment is necessary. So the issues for consideration by the committee is really the role of governments in promoting responsible business conduct. Should they appoint a specific focal point for that issue? Whether government should resort to mandatory standards, to regulation, or voluntary standards. The extent to which sub-regional or regional approach towards responsible business conduct can be forged, the desirability and visibility of developing indicators that measure compliance with internationally recognized standards, the willingness of individual member states to provide funding for a project in ESCAP that would try to achieve that, especially in the area of promoting responsible business conduct and sustainable investment, either by governments alone or in partnership with the private sector. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Roksch, for your presentation. Now the floor is open for comments. I have the list of speakers, and the first speaker on the list is now distinguished representative of Afghanistan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, Excellency, distinguished delegation, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank ESCAP for inviting the government of Afghanistan to participate in the 6th session on Committee on Trade and Investment. And I am pleased to be part of this session. Today I will speak about my country's vision for trade and connectivity and the role of Afghanistan that the role of that Afghanistan is already playing in deepening connectivity and expanding trade at both regional and inter-regional levels. Afghanistan is located at the convergence point of major regions with huge resources and potential for economic cooperation and integration, namely South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Far East. Afghanistan stands between these regions as a connecting hub, playing an important role in trade and connectivity at wider Euro-Asian continental level. Let me explain how some of the most important trends are emerging around Afghanistan's centrality with huge impact on trade and connectivity landscape in our wider region. First, various new Afghanistan-centered transport and transit corridors are being formed and operationalized, which can be exemplified by Lapis Lazuli route between Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. The Chabahar corridor between Afghanistan, Iran, and India. The five-nation railway corridor between China, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. These new corridors, coupled with the ongoing work on the Afghan National Railway Network, will play an instrumental role in both intra-corridor and inter-corridor connectivity at both regional and continental. This trend will help create an integrated transit and transport system in our wider region, leading to a considerable reduction in the cost of trade and transit. Second, new economic corridors are being formed around Afghanistan-centered mega-regional projects. The Tapi gas pipeline, which was once considered as a pipe dream, is now reaching the Afghan-Turkmen border and has already paved the way for forging an economic corridor encompassing not only gas pipeline, but electricity transmission line, fiber optic, as well as road and railway along the same route. This economic corridor has the potential to be extended both northward and southward, playing an increasingly important role, including in energy trade in the wider region. Third, there is a huge momentum being created in support of the air cargo corridor between Afghanistan and regional countries, including India, Kazakhstan, Turkey, China, EU, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. With an anticipated increase in the number of destinations and frequency of flights, these air corridors will have an important impact on the expansion of trade between Afghanistan and regional countries. And more than 6,000 tons of Afghan products have so far been transported from Afghanistan through these air corridors. Fourth, on the subcontinent, there is a great interest in the wider region to conclude trade and transit agreements, opening up new opportunities for the expansion of trade between Afghanistan and the surrounding region. The most recent example in this regard is the signing of transit agreement between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, on our part, we are fully committed to sharing the benefits of Afghanistan's centrality as a point of convergence, a land bridge, and a connecting hub at regional, inter-regional, and intercontinental level. We have been pursuing this vision under the two prominent Afghan-centered regional cooperation frameworks, namely the Regional Economic Cooperation Conference on Afghanistan, RECA, and the Heart of Asia Istanbul process, as well as through our engagement in various regional platforms such as ECO, SARC, CAREC, SCO, OEC, and UNSPK. The 7th Regional Economic Cooperation Conference on Afghanistan, RECA, was held under the theme of deepening connectivity and expanding trade through investing in infrastructure and improving synergy from 14 to 15 November 2017 in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Among other programs under the RECA 7, the Lapis Lazuli route agreement was signed among Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, making an important milestone in our joint efforts toward deepening connectivity and expanding trade in the wider Euro-Asian region. The first shipment via this important route commenced from Herat Afghanistan on December 13, 2018, during a high-level ceremony with the presence of His Excellency President Mohammad Ashraf Ghani, after passing through Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, reached Turkey successfully on December 29, 2018. The Chabahar corridor is also playing an important role in connectivity between South Asia and Central Asia. The first shipment via the Chabahar corridor commenced from Zaranj on February 24. During a high-level ceremony with the presence of the President of Afghanistan, after passing through Iran, is now reached India. To conclude, despite our efforts and achievements, there are still huge infrastructure gap in trade and transit barriers in the wider region. We have to place a special emphasis on addressing the infrastructure deficit and all forms of trade barriers, which remains among the most important impediment to regional economic cooperation and integration. This requires collective work to promote investment priority regional projects, including through creative financing modalities and forging business-to-business and public-private partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Afghanistan. Now, the next on the list is distinguished delegate of India. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished delegates. Even though there is no commonly held definition what sustainable investment means, it can be assumed that investment should be long-term and support economic growth in the host country. In other words, investment should be development-oriented with an inclusive agenda. This concept opens the debate on the whole gamut of investments, especially in developing countries. Sustainable investment should be focused on creating value in the recipient country in terms of job creation, labor protection, good environmental practices, welfare measures at the local level, etc. In many countries, corporate social responsibility forms part of their business activity, but this is voluntary. In India, such CSR activities are incentivized with tax rebates. Elsewhere in Asia-Pacific region, they may be mandatorily enforced, and the best practices could be compiled for building awareness in the region. India's FDI policy is very liberal. It provides for 100% equity participation in several sectors. Last year, India received a record $62 billion in FDIs, and we are confident that this trend will continue in this year also because of our large market size, skilled manpower, and vibrant economy. We would very much like businesses to reinvest rather than repatriate returns or profit on investment. Another challenge is litigation arising out of bilateral investment treaties. Businesses taking advantage of the gaps in the investment agreements are a major concern to developing countries. India is faced with about 25 international disputes arising out of bilateral investment treaties. Some of these disputes are on trivial grounds, taking advantage of the provisions such as protection on pre-establishment basis. It is for these reasons investor-state dispute settlement provisions in investment treaties are considered draconian, and in many countries are seeking dilution of ISDS and focusing on investment facilitation. We should all work towards a more friendly and facilitative investment policies that encourage win-win situation for the partners in investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other delegates wishing to take floor? Distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation again.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak in Russian. Спасибо за доклад. Некоторые его положения являются практически значимыми, такие как использование практики нефинансовой корпоративной отчетности для повышения инвестиционной привлекательности как стран в целом, так и отдельных предприятий. В данном контексте также важно отметить необходимость сокращения издержек в внутрирегиональной торговле, снижению административного давления на бизнес, а также важность формирования комфортной инвестиционной среды. В России есть позитивный опыт по улучшению условий ведения предпринимательской деятельности. Так, на протяжении последних нескольких лет положение России в международном рейтинге Doing Business, подготовленного Всемирным банком, постоянно улучшается. Позитивная динамика в этой области объясняется прежде всего принятием внутренних нормативно-правовых актов, которые предписывают создание институциональной основы для поддержки экспорта и малого и среднего предпринимательства. Также активно вводятся нормы нефинансовой корпоративной отчетности. Российский частный сектор вовлечен в работу по применению наилучших мировых практик. Так, некоторые отраслевые объединения, ассоциации уже используют положения документов УЭСР, таких как Декларация по международным инвестициям и многонациональным предприятиям, и руководство УЭСР для многонациональных предприятий. Например, нашли отражение некоторые положения этих документов в социальной хартии и антикоррупционной хартии российского бизнеса, подготовленных Российским союзом промышленников и предпринимателей. По нашему мнению, публичная нефинансовая отчетность является одним из важных источников данных, на основании которых может оцениваться степень достижения цели устойчивого развития как отдельными хозяйствующими субъектами, так и странами в целом. В соответствии с распоряжением правительства Российской Федерации от 5 мая 2017 года номер 876-Р утверждена концепция развития публичной нефинансовой отчетности, а также план мероприятий по ее реализации. Спасибо.
Thank you. Distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation.
Can I ask for clarification? A clarification from the Russian. Can I ask?
Yes.
I got to the translation your reference to a non-financial corporate document. Could you please explain what that means? Thank you.
Нефинансовая корпоративная отчетность – это имеется в виду отчетность, в котором компании раскрывают свои подходы к ответственному ведению бизнеса. Туда могут входить положения об исполнении отдельных положений международных правовых актов в области экологии, природопользования, социальной политики и прочее подобное.
Thank you for your clarification. Are there any other comments or intervention? Yes, please. I cannot.
Sorry, I'm just trying to send the email to them. So should I wait to send my email and then just say it? Because
From the International Institute of Trade and Development, yes. Please, you have to.
Thank you for. So I'll just send it later. Thank you so much for giving the International Institute for Trade and Development the opportunity to be here today and to share our thoughts on sustainable investment. And true enough, we are also very committed to sustainable investment, and here we are working with our member countries as well to find a better operating definition of what that looks like, and I've just prepared a very short note on this, if you would bear with me. So we feel that there is a need to take a more strategic approach when it comes to sustainable investment. We believe that could be a new social contract between the policymakers, the beneficiary, and the business entity itself. A good example is the need to develop inclusive trade in many areas of policies that relate to free trade agreements, foreign business operations regulations relating to foreign ownership, or investment incentives that are given to foreign businesses. For example, most special economic zones in developing Asia works to address and attract foreign capital to the country and the creation of jobs. However, little study has been made to first determine its impact to the local community, for instance, women or the local businesses that are impacted. Some of the studies that we have seen and are working with right now show that women, for example, are the most vulnerable when free trade agreements are signed or when special economic zones are established in a particular area. Women generally get sidelined either because they're excluded from participating. They either lose their jobs directly through adverse selection between a man and a woman, a man being the breadwinner of the family, and also limited access to opportunities in some shape or form. So we believe that the sustainable investment, the definition or the framework or whatever we want to call them, should be about looking at different lenses. And these lenses may be both direct and indirect beneficiary of this investment. This might require us to address unintended consequences of direct investment, as well as in our approach when we negotiate for trade agreements. Today's collection of trade agreements are unfriendly to women, whether it is intentional or not. The same could be said for technology and digital trade platforms, where there is a market concentration which exploits market access of the poor, and little is being addressed at this point. So when we talk about inclusive trade, we just recently concluded a digital trade workshop for the region last two weeks ago. And one of the concerns here is that when we talk about inclusive trade and we have these major e-commerce platforms coming in, and your local retail markets are not even mature enough to absorb the capacity that would come through. So how do these small businesses, micro and SMEs themselves, confronted with these large-scale platforms, how do they even begin to compete, much less to have a sustainable business? So I think there's a great deal of thought that needs to be put behind, and it's not. We can't put it as a general umbrella of what sustainable investment is. It needs to be specific. It needs to be very contextual. It may need to go at very, it needs to address specific stakeholders and different groups. And we shouldn't have, just an umbrella definition. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other delegates willing to take floor. So can I take that the committee takes note of the findings and recommendations contained in the document for this agenda item? Does the committee wish to make a specific decision or recommendation on any topic on this agenda item? I see none. So this brings us to the conclusion of the discussions on agenda item 6. I would like to request all distinguished delegates to resume their deliberations tomorrow on Thursday, 14 March at 9 a.m. sharp. As I will not be able to chair tomorrow's sessions, I call upon my vice chairs to take up their position as chair for tomorrow's sessions. I will resume the chair on Friday. I wish all of you a pleasant evening. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.